She was never going to be more than a charity case. That's what they whispered when Miles Young vanished on their wedding day. No call, no explanation, just silence. But Grace didn't crumble. She rebuilt. From the ashes of heartbreak, she rose to lead a venture capital firm investing in the very brilliance she was once denied. And when Miles's empire started to fall, the only person who could save him was the woman he left behind. But this time, she's not here for a reunion. Stay with us. What starts as heartbreak often ends in power, because every voice they tried to silence deserves to be heard. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Have you ever rewritten your own story? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Black Stories Untold with love, and ring that notification bell for more heartwarming stories that celebrate strength. The sun filtered through the stained glass windows like soft music made visible. Grace Moore stood at the altar in a white satin gown, her curls swept up beneath a delicate veil, the faint scent of lilies wrapping around her like a prayer. Her hands, trembling just slightly, clutched the bouquet she had chosen with care. She had imagined this day for years. Her mother's hand on her shoulder that morning, the way her friends had cried seeing her in the dress, the sound of her name being spoken with pride. But as the seconds passed and the double doors stayed shut, the air inside the chapel began to change. It began with silence. A strange kind of silence that had weight to it. The kind that fills your ears with the pounding of your own heartbeat. Then the whispers started. A groomsman shifting uncomfortably. A bridesmaid glancing down at her shoes. The pastor cleared his throat and murmured something to the pianist who began replaying the same soft tune. Twice, 3 times. Still no sign of Miles. Grace's eyes scanned the space beyond the altar. Every seat was full. Her college friends, her cousins from Georgia, her grandmother sitting straight-backed in navy lace, but the man who had asked her to spend forever with him had not come. The photographer snapped a picture anyway. A flash lit up Grace's stunned face. Somewhere someone started crying. Grace could not move. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she held her posture like a statue carved in disbelief. The pastor approached her slowly, speaking gently, but Grace heard none of it. His words blurred behind the rush of blood in her ears. Outside the chapel, the cars waited with ribbons tied to mirrors. The reception hall had centerpieces labeled with their favorite songs. A cake that read, "Forever Begins Today," sat untouched in a room full of servers who would never serve. By the time her mother reached her, Grace was already turning away from the altar. The bouquet dropped to the floor with a soft thud. The white lilies bent, delicate and broken. A soundless apology. That night, Grace did not sleep. She sat in her apartment, still half in the dress. Mascara smudged. Heels kicked off somewhere near the door. She stared at the framed picture of the two of them on the bookshelf, his arm around her waist, her smile wide and believing. No phone call came, no explanation, no text. No one could find him. His apartment was locked, his phone off. It was as if Miles Young had vanished into the air that once carried his promises. In the morning, Grace packed 2 suitcases. She left the ring in its velvet box on the edge of the sink, a place where things were meant to be washed away. She deleted his contact from her phone, removed the photos, burned the wedding invitation on her balcony. The headlines followed her for weeks. Society darling abandoned at the altar. Friends tried to console her. A few speculated, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the look on her grandmother's face when the doors never opened. What mattered was the sound of her own name being whispered like a question that had no answer. Grace left the city before the church could refund the deposit, before the cake could be thrown out, Before, the story could chase her through grocery store aisles and late-night newsreels. She boarded a plane without telling anyone the destination, a new life waiting somewhere she had not yet defined. Her heart heavy, her voice quiet, but her spirit still standing. The corner office had floor-to-ceiling windows and a skyline that most men would kill for. Miles Young stood in front of it every morning, coffee in hand, staring at the city he had conquered. His reflection hovered faintly in the glass. Tailored suits, sharp jaw, cool eyes. On the outside, he looked like success, the kind people wrote about, the kind that got invited to Forbes galas and hedge fund roundtables. But inside, it was quieter, always quieter than it should have been. The world called him brilliant. Clients said he had a mind like a scalpel, slicing through risk with precision. He turned startups into empires, losses into leverage. And yet, none of that brilliance ever seemed to touch the part of him that stayed cold. Colleagues admired his work ethic. Assistants feared his silences. Women tried to get close, but none made it past the surface. Miles didn't let them, couldn't let them. He told himself that leaving Grace was the right thing. She would have been shackled to a man crumbling under debt, drowning in expectations passed down by a father who never blinked, and a mother who measured love in achievement. That morning, 5 years ago, he had sat in his car across from the church, fists clenched against the wheel. His lungs refused to open. His throat wouldn't close. He watched the clock tick past the hour and hated himself in real time. He had never gone back, not to the church, not to the apartment they once shared. He let everything rot in silence, assuming time would bury it. But time didn't bury things. It preserved them. Each year that passed only made Grace's absence sharper. He saw her smile in strangers, heard her laugh in passing cafes. Every now and then someone would ask whatever happened to her. He would shrug, lie, say something vague. No one ever asked twice. People like Miles were not supposed to have regrets. They were supposed to move on. But he never did. The only photo he had of her sat at the bottom of his desk drawer, under legal files and reports he no longer read. It was taken by accident at a cafe in Brooklyn right before they moved in together. She was mid-laugh, holding a pastry with powdered sugar on her fingers, a light in her eyes that made the entire background irrelevant. He couldn't throw it away, couldn't forget that once she had loved him without caution. At night, the silence in his penthouse thickened. He would stare at the ceiling and wonder if she was happy, if she still hated him, if she had forgiven him. Sometimes he convinced himself she had moved on, married, started over. Sometimes he told himself she had forgotten his name altogether. That lie helped him sleep. During meetings, he was flawless, sharp, cold, focused. But in between the strategy calls and capital reports, he found himself searching the corners of every room, hoping, dreading, wondering what he would do if she ever walked in again. He didn't know that Grace Moore was not only about to walk in, she was coming to save what was left of his kingdom. The boardroom was a fortress of glass and polished wood, high above the city like a throne room carved out of steel. Miles sat at the head of the table, hands folded tightly, the tip of his pen tapping against a folder he had already read 3 times. Around him, the board murmured in low tones, tension curled in the air like smoke. The failed merger with Daxon and Company had bled more than just capital. It had shaken confidence. Lawsuits multiplied, clients whispered, reporters circled like bloodhounds. He wore the same navy suit he did on every crisis day. It made him feel controlled, composed, untouchable. But today, something felt different. The numbers were off. The power balance had shifted, and the vultures were watching. Across from him, Mitchell Lang, the oldest board member, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. A few murmurs died off. The investor group arrives in 5 minutes. If this doesn't land, we'll start losing partners by Friday. Miles didn't look up. He didn't need to. He already knew. We need liquidity. We need confidence. We need a damn miracle. Outside the boardroom, footsteps echoed. The glass door opened. And just like that, the temperature in the room changed. She walked in with measured grace. A tailored cream suit, dark curls pulled back, eyes that did not flinch when they met his. Her presence didn't just shift the room, it commanded it. The silence was total. "This is Grace Moore," said a man beside her, some junior associate whose name Miles would never remember, lead partner at M&G Holdings. Grace. His pulse stuttered, but his expression did not change. Years of practiced control held firm, no flicker, no gasp. Just a slow, polite nod. She took her seat across from him, opened a folder, spoke in a voice smooth and clear. "We've reviewed your current standing. The assets are strong, but the structure is brittle. We're here to fix that. If we choose to move forward, the terms will be strict, but fair." Every word landed like a stone. Miles nodded slowly, letting her speak. It was not until she turned a page without so much as a glance at him that he realized something brutal. She was not here for revenge. She was here for business. And that was worse. The board leaned in, asking questions. She answered them all, concise, brilliant, unshaken. Every solution she offered felt like a lock being turned. She had studied the cracks, found the leaks. She had come prepared to rescue what he could no longer hold together. As she spoke, Miles watched her hands, the way she underlined figures, the steady rhythm of her voice, the lack of hesitation. She didn't stumble. She didn't avoid him. Furthermore, she had not come to forgive or to punish. She had come to win. When the meeting ended, the board erupted into cautious optimism. Miles stayed seated. Grace gathered her notes without hurry. Their eyes met for a single breath. He stood, but she had already turned. He was no longer the one walking away. Later that evening, the building emptied floor by floor. Lights dimmed. Voices faded. But Miles stayed in his office, watching the rain smear against the windows like memories refusing to disappear. The city blinked below him, endless and unforgiving. He had built this life in clean lines and tall walls. But today, one woman had walked in and shattered the illusion of control with nothing more than a glance. Grace Moore. She hadn't aged. She had evolved. The softness he remembered was still there, but wrapped in something unshakable. Her eyes no longer searched for approval. Her smile, when it came, held nothing extra. No warmth wasted, no bitterness offered, just precision, power, peace. And yet Miles could still feel the heat rising in his chest when he replayed that moment. "This isn't personal, Mr. Young. It's business." Everyone else had laughed. A polite, nervous kind of laughter. But he had heard it for what it was, a warning, a reminder, and somewhere beneath it, a whisper of the fire she used to carry for him. She had sat across from him like she belonged at the head of the table. He hadn't expected that. Not the calm, not the control, not the complete absence of hesitation. The woman he left behind had cried on her knees in a church. The woman today didn't blink. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under the weight of thoughts he hadn't let surface in years. He remembered the way she used to talk about her dreams, about legacy, about impact, how she wanted to fund education in underrepresented neighborhoods, start programs for girls who looked like her. Back then, he had smiled, told her they'd get there. One day, after the firm took off, after the real money came in. She didn't wait. She built her own future, without him. And now she was here. Not as a footnote in his story, but as the reason the final chapter might still be salvaged. A knock at the door pulled him out of his spiral. His assistant stepped in and handed him a file. Initial proposal from M&G Holdings. Ms. Moore said she'll have revisions by Friday. He nodded, eyes not leaving the folder. The door closed behind her with a click that echoed louder than it should have. He didn't open the file right away. Instead, he opened his drawer, pulled out the photo he never showed anyone. Grace, years ago, mid-laugh, powdered sugar on her cheek. A life that could have been. A life he threw away for a version of success that now sat on the verge of collapse. She hadn't come to destroy him. She had come to rescue the thing he once thought mattered most. But it wasn't the company that shook him. It was the knowing in her eyes, the quiet power, the calm that only comes from surviving what should have broken you. Grace Moore had returned, and this time she had everything he never gave her. The days blurred into deadlines and deliverables. Grace moved through the halls of young capital like she had always belonged there. Executives began deferring to her. Analysts watched her with reverence. Her decisions were swift, her vision clear. She restructured 3 departments in under 10 days, cut $250,000 in redundancies without bloodshed, and brought in a legal team that could eat litigation threats for breakfast. No drama, no fanfare, just quiet, surgical brilliance. Miles watched from a distance at first. She occupied the corner conference room, a glass box at the end of the hallway, where meetings ran late and the lights stayed on long past office hours. Sometimes he'd walk by and catch glimpses of her, coat draped over the chair, sleeves rolled, brows furrowed in focus. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. Their first real interaction came on a Thursday. He brought coffee to her office without warning. 2 cups, her favorite blend, remembered from a past life. She took it without hesitation, without a thank you, setting it beside her laptop like he was just another assistant. He stayed standing. "You're working too hard," he said after a moment. She didn't look up. "So were you. That's how we got here." He tried again the next day. A compliment about a presentation, an offhanded joke. She responded with polite nods, a few half smiles. Nothing more. She gave him no entry, no warmth. But her presence haunted him just the same. Nights became the hardest. They were often the last 2 in the building. Silent elevators, shared glances in passing. Once, they reached for the same file in the records room. His hand brushed hers. She didn't pull away, but she didn't linger either. He wanted to ask her everything. Where she went after the wedding, how she built herself back up, if she ever thought of him when the lights were low and the world quiet. But instead, they talked strategy, market positioning, asset recovery. She was there to save the company, not to resurrect the past. One night he found her in the lounge staring at a wall of investor profiles. She looked tired, the edges of her composure fraying just slightly. He sat across from her, not saying a word, just being there. When she finally spoke, it was low and clipped. "I'm not doing this for you." He nodded. "I know." She turned back to the screen, fingers dancing over a touchscreen filled with names and numbers. "This company was worth saving, but don't mistake me for a second chance." He didn't. Not anymore. Still, there was something unspoken in the air between them. Not longing. Not yet forgiveness. Just the quiet gravity of 2 people who had once shared a future, now orbiting each other as strangers who knew too much. And Miles, once sure of everything, now found himself wondering whether redemption came in words or actions, whether peace meant letting go or holding still long enough to prove he could stay. The headline hit before sunrise. A viral storm. Every blog, every business column, every whispering corner of the internet had the same angle. The former fiancée now controlling the company of the man who left her behind. They used old photos of Grace in a white dress, Miles in a tux, smiling like a man who meant it. Clickbait gold. Humiliation dressed up as curiosity. By mid-morning, The whispers had made their way into the elevators, the conference calls, the corner cafes 2 blocks from the office. Grace walked through it untouched. Her stride stayed steady. Her eyes never flinched. She moved like a woman whose armor had been forged long before the world decided to watch her bleed. Miles, on the other hand, felt the weight of every stare. He heard the laughter that stopped when he entered a room. The articles painted him as the villain, and for once, he couldn't argue. He deserved worse. He avoided Grace all day. Meetings were canceled, emails went unanswered. He stayed locked behind his office door until the building emptied and the city began its slow exhale into night. It was nearly 10 when she knocked. She didn't wait for a response. She walked in and closed the door behind her with the quiet finality of a question that would not go unasked. "So this is what it's come to," she said, setting the folded magazine on his desk. Her face calm, her voice even. But something shimmered beneath the surface. Not anger, not heartbreak. Just the echo of something once tender, now sharpened by time. Miles stood slowly. He picked up the magazine but didn't open it. "I never told you why I didn't come," he said, his voice rasping like gravel in his throat. She didn't interrupt. She just waited. "My father died the week before. Massive heart attack. I didn't tell anyone. Not even you. The debts he left behind could have buried us both. And the morning of the wedding, I had a panic attack. In the car. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. I sat there watching the minutes pass. And I told myself you deserved better than a man unraveling in his own silence." Grace stayed still. One hand rested on the edge of his desk. The other clenched lightly by her side. "You didn't protect me," she said finally. "You didn't shield me from the storm. You were the storm. And I stood in the eye of it, thinking you'd come. You let me stand there alone. I thought I was saving you," he said softly. "No, you were saving yourself." He looked up then, into her eyes. And for the first time, there was no mask between them, just the rubble of what had once been almost everything. She didn't cry, but her eyes gleamed, like someone who had already cried all the tears and learned to wear them as steel. "I don't want your apologies," she said, stepping back toward the door. "I want you to sit with what you left behind." And then she was gone, leaving nothing behind but truth, and a silence so complete it nearly swallowed him whole. The rain came down in sheets that evening, streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows like melted glass. The boardroom had emptied hours ago, but Miles stayed behind, sleeves rolled, collar open, staring at the charts on the wall without really seeing them. The company was stabilizing. Deals were landing. Confidence was returning. And for the first time in a long time, none of that felt like the win he was chasing. Grace was still there too. Across the hall, her light cast a faint golden glow from her office. He watched her through the glass, not intrusively, just quietly. She stood over a set of documents, pen in hand, lips pressed into a line of focus. He had seen that same look 5 years ago as she read through housing contracts for her first non-profit partnership. Back then, she had believed in things with the whole weight of her heart. Now, she wielded belief with precision. He pushed open her door without knocking. She didn't startle, just looked up, then back to her work. "You're still here," he said. "So are you." He hesitated, then sat across from her. No excuses this time, no pretense of business. Just silence stretching between two people who had exhausted every version of pride and regret. "I saw what you did for the Baxter project," she said without lifting her gaze. "You didn't have to give them that grant. It was the right thing to do." She nodded once. "You're doing more right things lately." He shifted in his seat. He didn't know how to respond to that. Not because he didn't want to, but because he wasn't used to her offering anything other than distance. "I'm learning," he said finally. "Took me long enough." She closed her folder and met his eyes. There was no smile, but something in her had softened, not melted, just eased. I went to the community center last week. They said you've been visiting, talking to the teens, donating under someone else's name. He shrugged. They don't need my name. They need someone who sees them. You didn't used to think like that. I didn't used to think at all. The rain deepened, filling the silence with its rhythm. Grace leaned back slightly, her gaze lingering on the window. Funny, she said quietly. I used to imagine moments like this. Late night. City lights. Just us in a room, talking about things that mattered. I used to picture what I'd say, how I'd say it. And now I'm just tired. Miles leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. What would you say if you weren't tired? She looked at him for a long moment, then stood, gathering her papers. You still owe me a dance. It landed between them like a spark, soft but electric. She walked to the door, pausing only once, but not tonight. Then she was gone, leaving the scent of rain and possibility in her wake. Miles didn't follow. He just sat there, heart quiet, knowing now what he hadn't before. That redemption didn't come with a standing ovation. It came in the quiet moments. And in the simple, impossible grace of being given one more chance to try again. The alert came in just after midnight. One blinking notification on the server dashboard that turned into 5, then 50. By dawn, Young Capital's network had been compromised. Confidential portfolios leaked. Internal documents exposed. Millions in investor capital suddenly on the edge of vapor. By morning, panic was a living thing. Clients were calling. Journalists sniffed blood. Legal teams scrambled to plug holes that hadn't existed yesterday. Miles stood in the center of it all, phone pressed to his ear, pulse thrumming with something dangerously close to fear. Years of calculated growth reduced to chaos in the span of one night. Grace didn't flinch. While others paced or froze, she took control. She divided teams, reassigned tasks, set up a war room in the old marketing floor. She spoke to every department, voice calm, steady, never raising it, but always heard. Her orders became gospel. Her focus became fuel. She was not angry. She was not afraid. She was on fire. Miles followed her lead. They barely slept. They worked from dawn until whatever hour passed for night, surviving on bitter coffee and adrenaline. She read legal briefs with red-rimmed eyes. He handled investor calls with a new kind of transparency. No spin, no charm, just truth, and a promise to fix what they could still save. By the third day, they sat side by side in the dim light of the backup server room, the hum of machines filling the silence between them. Grace had a laptop balanced on her knees, fingers moving in practiced rhythm. Miles sat beside her, quiet for a long time, watching the light flicker across her face. "You didn't have to do this," he said finally. "You could have let it burn." She didn't stop typing. Could have. Didn't. He leaned back against the wall, exhaustion weighing down his frame. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me." The words came softly. No grand moment, no expectation, just the truth. She looked at him then, really looked. Sweat damp at his temples, eyes tired but open, no walls, no polished armor. "Then be worthy of it," she said. She didn't say it cruelly. There was no accusation in her tone, just a challenge, a mirror, a call. He nodded, and for once he didn't offer promises. He offered presence. They spent the rest of the night combing through the breach, tracing every weak point, issuing statements. He watched her hold the company together 1 hour at a time, and every time his confidence wavered, it was her voice that steadied him. When the breach was finally contained, when the last investor had been reassured and the news cycle had begun to fade, the team gathered in the central atrium. Applause erupted, but Grace didn't smile. She looked over at Miles, and he, exhausted and grateful, didn't speak. He just nodded once, because he knew. He hadn't just watched her save a company, he had watched her save him. The air was crisp on the rooftop, the kind that made city lights shimmer a little brighter and silence feel a little more sacred. A table was set near the edge, nothing extravagant. 2 chairs, a bottle of red wine, and the skyline stretching out like a memory reassembled. No photographers, no speeches, just 2 people who had earned the quiet. Grace stepped into the space with her usual grace, her coat caught slightly by the wind. She didn't ask why he had invited her. She didn't need to. Miles was already there, leaning on the railing, eyes scanning the city that had once witnessed his greatest failure. He turned as she approached, offering a small smile. Not the charming, calculated kind. Something quieter, something real. "You could have stayed away," he said. "You could have let it fall," she replied. They sat. The silence between them no longer carried sharp edges. It just was. Like 2 waves meeting after a long storm. The company had survived, grown. The headlines called it a miracle, but the people inside the walls knew better. They saw who had steadied the ship, who had rebuilt trust when it seemed irreparably broken. Grace had become the anchor in waters that once devoured men like Miles. He poured the wine, handing her a glass. Their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away. The city below pulsed and buzzed, but up here, time moved slower. "I wanted to say thank you," he said after a while, "for staying, for saving what I was too blind to protect." Grace took a sip of wine and studied him over the rim of her glass. "It wasn't about saving you, I know. And it wasn't about proving anything either. I know that too." She looked at him, long and measured. "Then why are we here?" "Because I don't want to make this about what we were, or what I lost." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a single folder. Not a ring, not a gift, just a document. Clean, simple, respectful. "I want you to be more than a name on our reports. I want this to be yours too. Real equity, real partnership. Not because I owe you, but because I trust you to build what I never could alone." He slid the folder across the table. Grace didn't reach for it. She let the weight of the moment settle. "That's a big step," she said softly. "So is forgiveness." "This isn't forgiveness, Miles." He nodded. "I know. I'm not asking for it." A pause. Then she reached for the folder, her fingers light on the edge. "Partnership I can do. Trust," she added, standing slowly, her voice gentler than he'd heard it in years. "We'll see." She walked toward the elevator, folder tucked under her arm. Before the door closed, she looked back once. Miles stayed where he was, staring at the space she had just left, heart steady. She hadn't said yes to anything more, but she hadn't said no, and for the first time in years that was enough. The ballroom gleamed under crystal chandeliers, the hum of anticipation rising as guests filled the velvet seats. It was the kind of event built for headlines, polished, powerful, full of whispers that turned into legacies. But tonight wasn't about spectacle. It was about something heavier, earned, reclaimed. The backdrop behind the podium read Moore and Young Impact Fund in clean gold lettering. Below it, a single phrase stretched across the screen: "Investing in those who build from the ground up." Grace stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle before stepping forward. Her presence quieted the room. No flash of jewelry, no dramatic gown, just a tailored black suit, her curls pinned back, and a gaze that held the weight of everything she had survived. Miles stood a few steps behind, not in front, not beside her yet, just present, watching. She adjusted the mic, then spoke. "A year ago, I signed a partnership that didn't just change a company. It changed the way I defined power, not in capital, not in control, but in creation. She paused, letting her words anchor the air. When we decided to launch this fund, the mission was simple: to invest in the underestimated, to seed possibility in communities where potential has always been present, just not always visible. We don't build from the top down, we build from the roots up. A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. And yes, I know what the headlines said, she continued. The woman he left at the altar now signs his checks. The internet loves symmetry. But this isn't revenge. It's not a comeback story. It's not a drama. It's peace. A beat passed, and then the applause came. Slow at first, then thunderous. Not for drama, but for truth. Miles joined her then. He didn't touch the mic, didn't reach for her hand. He simply stood beside her, where he should have stood years ago. Not to claim, not to lead, but to support. He looked out over the crowd, investors, activists, entrepreneurs, and then back at Grace. She didn't smile for the cameras. She smiled for herself. Later, when the cameras were down and the champagne flutes half empty, they found a quiet corner overlooking the city. The lights below sparkled, and Grace leaned against the balcony rail, watching the night unfold. "You were brilliant tonight," Miles said quietly. "I didn't do it for you. I know." He looked at her, not as a man chasing what once was, but as someone finally learning how to stand beside something bigger than ego. "I meant what I said," she added. "Peace costs more than revenge. But it's worth it." He nodded, slipping his hands into his pockets. "You've changed the company. Changed me. I didn't come to change you, Miles." He met her eyes. "I know, but I'm better for it anyway." In the reflection of the glass, they didn't look like a couple reunited. They looked like a future rewritten, not lovers, but something rarer. Equals. Don't keep this story to yourself. Someone out there is standing where she once stood, unseen, unheard, and underestimated. Share this video with them. Let it be proof that what breaks you doesn't get the final say. What you build next does. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.